The President. Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. Members entering the chamber should stop shouting. Members, please be seated. The Chief Executive will first address the Council. President, honourable members, fellow citizens, I'm so glad to come and take questions from members in this new legislative year. Economic well-being is the basis of social stability and improved livelihood. A better economy means more income for the people and the government and more wherewithals to improve livelihood, housing, poverty, elderly care, and infrastructure. Last year saw a moderate economic growth with inflation well under control and full employment. The young people have more opportunities for employment. The employment rate has been the highest. People's income has increased. The lowest paid 30% full-time workers had a pay rise of 7 to 8% in June to August, or 3 to 4% after inflation. The average working population saw a pay rise of 5.7%. What is noteworthy is that last year, revenues from profits tax and salaries tax have hit new highs, reflecting a rise in corporate profits and incomes. It shows the economic situation in Hong Kong. This good economic situation is the hard work of everybody, and I hope that we should cherish what we have. In terms of housing, the administration's double-pronged measures are beginning to yield results. Other than resulting to stamp duty to curb external demands, investment and speculation, the ultimate solution lies in the significant increase in land supply. 3 years ago, our efforts in increasing land supply have resulted in more supply in properties. The market data show that the prices of flats in the primary and secondary markets have been easing. The government will be releasing more data for reference by the members of the public. The administration will, against all odds, resolutely and progressively ease and resolve the housing problems. The government continues vigorously to take forward the infrastructural development and identify land supply. We have identified land for these purposes, and some of the land has already been allocated. The government has shown the determination to tackle poverty. We have the poverty line, and which is the basis for formulating policies. In 2014, the population in poverty has dropped to 960,000, and the poverty rate stood at 14.3%, both at the lowest level for 6 years. Policy intervention has lifted 172,600 households out of poverty in 2014. The number of poor people dipped below 1 billion for 2 consecutive years. This shows the initiatives adopted by this administration have achieved tremendous results. The administration and society should continue with their work. Large infrastructural projects are coming on stream. These will benefit the members of the public. The South Island Line eastern section, when completed, will shorten the journey from Admiralty to Ocean Park to 4 minutes. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge will link up Hong Kong's road network with Macau and Zhuhai. One can travel all the way to Guangxi or even Vietnam by land transport. The Tuen Mun Chek Lap Kok link will conveniently link up Tuen Mun and Chek Lap Kok via the longest subsea tunnel in Hong Kong. Also, we have the Central Wan Chai bypass and the Guangzhou-Shenzhen-Hong Kong Express Rail. All these projects have got underway. Some are expected to be completed in 3 to 4 years' time. The volatile external markets are causing uncertainties in the local economy. The retail sector show a lackluster performance for the first 8 months this year, with retail sales down by 2.2% compared with the same period last year. Just in August alone, retail sales were down by 5.4%. The tourism sector also gives us cause for concern. Contrary to the previously rising trend, the visitor numbers from January to September have dropped compared with the same period last year. Non-mainland visitors have dropped by 3.5%. The September situation was even more worrying. Mainland visitors have dropped by 4.6% and overall by 4%. This sector employs a considerable number of grassroots people. If the tourism sector shows signs of trouble, it's going to have implications on employment. We cannot underestimate the economic risks. The U.S. interest rate hike, the deceleration of the mainland market will have an impact on Hong Kong. Other than the short-term issues, we still have to contend with the long-term structural problems. First, Hong Kong's economy needs diversification and a driving force for innovation. The rapidly aging population will impede our economic development. The Census and Statistics Department recently projected the elderly population in the next 50 years. In the coming 15 to 20 years, the rise will be most drastic in 20 years' time. Those above 65 will double from the present 1.1 billion to 2.28 billion. How to maintain economic growth against the background of aging population remains an issue that we must face and plan for in Hong Kong. We have to develop new industries for our economy while upgrading the values of existing ones. We have to create more and better investment and employment opportunities. The SAR government has been advocating the setting up of an IT bureau to foster cooperation and coordination amongst the government, the industry, the academia, and the research sectors, thus injecting more new impetus into our economy and creating multiple job opportunities for the citizens of various sectors. Just last week, I led the delegation of the 4 sectors on a fact-finding visit to Israel to learn about innovation and technology. Israel, like Hong Kong, is in lack of natural resources. But with the hard work and creativity of the people, plus the considerable support of the government, Israel's achievements in the IT sector are visible to all. Hong Kong is not short of talents in the R&D sector. There is no lack of examples of successful entrepreneurships. This, coupled with a robust capital market and our proximity to the mainland manufacturing base, have created the right condition for the development of the IT industry. The government has once again submitted a funding proposal to the FC to set up the IT Bureau. I urge members to pass the funding as soon as possible. After the constitutional reform package was voted down in June, I said that we would focus our attention on the economy and livelihood. Over the past few months, secretaries and bureau directors and myself have been promoting Hong Kong in the outside world to open up more markets. The government and business sectors in these places do attach Hong Kong's importance as a superconnector and hope to take full advantage of Hong Kong to connect with the mainland and other economies. The government will continue to strengthen the G2G connections, playing a bridging role for the business sector. I announced in September the establishment of the 12th ETO in Jakarta, Indonesia. The ASEAN has replaced Europe and the US to become the second largest trading partner. Indonesia's economy accounts for 40% of ASEAN's GDP, and this is also where the ASEAN Secretariat is located. To set up an ETO there is to strengthen the ties with Indonesia and ASEAN and create favorable conditions and develop business opportunities arising from One Belt, One Road. Hong Kong is an external-oriented economy. we have to buttress our connections with the outside world to help with the development of business for our business sector. Hong Kong enjoys simple tax regime, robust legal system, freedom of information and capital, an open economy, Chinese and English proficiency, long-term connection with the outside world. We must fully harness these advantages. I look forward to working with honourable members and everyone in society to collectively develop our economy and improve the livelihood. We're going to start our consultation on the 2016 policy address and the 16-17 budget. The SAR government is anxious to hear your views together improve the livelihood of the people of Hong Kong. Thank you. The Chief Executive will now answer questions put by members. Ms. Wong Ting-kwong. President, thank you. Chief Executive, in your speech, you mentioned that Hong Kong is suffering from external uncertainties and internal problems. The global recovery is very slow, and there is the specter of an interest rate hike in the U.S. In Hong Kong, we have the political wrangling, the filibustering, anti-parallel protests, parallel goods protests, and the shopping tour protests, and so on. And in every sector, they are facing a lot of difficulties. The visitors' numbers are down, and the retail sales are showing signs of a decline. Overall, the economy is going to enter into a difficult period, and it is not far off before we see retrenchment and business liquidation. How does the government foresee the future of our economy in Hong Kong, and how will the government help with the SMEs? Chief Executive. President, thank you very much, Mr. Wong, for the question. The external situation, I mentioned that in my speech. I don't want to repeat it. In fact, it is fraught with challenges, given the deceleration of the growth in the mainland and uncertainties in Europe and the U.S. There are challenges, and Mr. Wong mentioned the internal problems. However, we have to overcome all these challenges. I said before here in this chamber many times, we have to cherish our opportunities for economic development. We should not do anything that will be undermining our image. In particular, we should not undermine our image as some hospitable place for visitors. In terms of opportunities, we are bound with a lot of business opportunities. Indonesia is 40% in terms of ASEAN's GDP. We should lose no time in building ties with Indonesia. I know the members are very concerned about the development of the tourism sector and also the retail sector and the challenges arising from these sectors. The tourism sector is of a small percentage of the GDP, but this sector is terribly important. The government will give more support. I'm going to talk about some of the measures that we have undertaken. The key thing is that this sector provides considerable employment opportunities for the grassroots people. In terms of GDP in Hong Kong, trade and logistics remain the largest proportion, 25%, to be followed by finance, which is 16%. Professional service, it is rising pretty rapidly. It is in terms of GDP contribution, it is neck and neck with the tourism sector. So we have to be concerned about what's happening in the tourism sector of late. And also we have to develop the other sectors as well. There are some new industries that showing good signs of development. Let me say something about the superconnector and the role that we play. The stock exchange issued a press release just yesterday regarding the London-Hong Kong Connect proposal. the President visited the UK, and there was an announcement of cooperation between the UK and China. One of them is that the Hong Kong exchange has acquired the LME in 2012, and they have signed a memorandum of understanding with the exchange in the UK to set up this London Hong Kong Connect. Now, this is a fertile seed that has been planted. We hope that this will germinate and blossom. There will be plenty of opportunities for Hong Kong. In terms of tourism, we are facing considerable challenges.
In the beginning of this year, in the budget, the government already make an additional allocation of $80 million to Hong Kong Tourism Board to promote Hong Kong as a hospitable city, to boost our status as a city for tourists. And recently, we made another additional allocation of $10 million to set up a matching fund to strengthen our ties with other countries. And we must therefore grasp the opportunities presented to us. So on the one hand, we must stay vigilant. On the other hand, we should not be over pessimistic over our capabilities in terms of economic development in the future. Mr. Wong Ting-kwong, I'd like to ask the Chief Executive, what short-term measures the Hong Kong SL government has to help young people start up their business? Chief Executive, on various fronts, the government has been promoting work in this regard. In various aspects, we have supporting funds. Now, the greatest obstacle or risks to youth starting business in Hong Kong is their expenditure on rental and their capability to enter into tenancies. And that is why we want to give more space for young people to start up their business. And during my visit to Israel, there is a facility in one of the cities, Tel Aviv. There is a space for youth to share, to set up their companies, and it serves as a base for their workspace. And young people are only charged low rent, and it's proved to be a success. We believe that we should promote this in Hong Kong. When young people gather there, they serve to encourage each other. On the one hand, they don't need to enter into tenancies of 2 or 3 years, and they can save rent. And on the other hand, as young people gather in the same workspace, they can give spiritual support to each other. Mr. Chung-kai. Mr. Leung, the former chief executive, Mr. Donald Tsang, was alleged to have concealed the relevant interests from the Scene Council, and he was charged with misconduct in office. And after you assumed office, you received an interest of £4 million. And according to rules on the mainland, you should have been penalized. And now the former chief executive has been prosecuted, the offense, and you, in fact, can be prosecuted the same. Before you assumed office, you failed to declare your interest to the chief judge, the 4 million British pounds, and also the $50 million sum that you received as you left your previous post. Chief Executive. Well, in relation to Mr. Chung-kai's question, I believe either he has ignored or he is totally ignorant of the press releases and statements issued previously by either the UGL or my office. Mr. President, he isn't answering my question. Please tell us whether you have declared your interest to the Chief Judge and whether you have declared the interest of £4 million to the Executive Council. I think I've given the explanation clearly. Mr. Sin, please be seated. You've asked your question and the Chief Executive has answered you. Mr. Albert Chan, it's not your time to speak. Please be seated. Mr. President, my question is whether he will surrender himself. Mr. Sin, I think the Chief Executive has already answered your question. Ms. Claudia Mo. Ms. Claudia Mo. Mr. President, according to some, when the Chief Executive enters the chamber, members should remain standing. It shows the transcendent status of the Chief Executive. But I want to make it clear that just now when CY Leung came in, many Democrats, including myself, remained seated in the chamber. This is a very strong proof to the contrary. Well, Mr. Xi Jinping recently is visiting the Britain. I don't know whether it has been mentioned that after CY Leung assumed office, our economy, our culture, our political situation has been mainlandized. He is even going after the royal our post boxes. I don't know whether the Queen knows that the royal insignias are going to be covered. What Hong Kong people are most concerned is that Mr. CY Leung will step up his effort and turn Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong into Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong. So in English, are you going to turn the word Hong Kong into a Romanized pinyin, Xianggang? Well, Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the Prince of Wales Hospital, Queen Mary Hospital, etc. Are the names going to change into something like People's Hospital? You've asked a question. Please be seated. Chief Executive. Well, I studied in the Queen's College, and I said in public previously that the name would not be changed, and I have no plan to change the name of Queen's College. Of course, the crown in the school logo has been replaced, but not on my suggestion. And I'd invite Ms. Claudia Mo to read the basic law on which the name of Hong Kong in English is Hong Kong. Ms. Mo. Mr. President, very often we receive instructions from Beijing, and we know that CY Leung is always doing the biddings of Beijing. Well, some say that CY Leung represents Beijing to colonize Hong Kong, be it job opportunities or education opportunities. Our young people are deprived of their opportunities. Well, Ms. Mo, please refrain from making comments. Please ask your question. My question is this. If you genuinely believe that you are doing the biddings of Beijing to decolonize Hong Kong, then as far as university councils are concerned, you should scrap the power of the chief executive to appoint council members. You should not make it a base for fans, for your supporters. As the chief executive, I'm given the powers as the chief executive to fulfill my constitutional duty to serve Hong Kong. The basic law stipulates a number of things, including a one country, two systems. Hong Kong people is administering Hong Kong, and we hold steadfast to these rules in governing Hong Kong. As for upward mobilities for young people, I think those who are concerned about Hong Kong would agree that Hong Kong has many opportunities, both locally and overseas, and we should grasp these opportunities. So for young people to go to the mainland, it is not as frightening prospect as what Ms. Mo suggests. I'm not saying that. I'm not, well, please refrain from having a debate, Ms. Mo, please be seated. Well, but he should not put words into other people's mouths. I think you have clarified your point. I don't agree that we should be confrontational. I don't agree with Ms. Claudia Mo that our government has been doing nothing but executing instructions from Beijing. We have implemented some major policies, even to the dismay of mainland people, and yet we pressed ahead. For example, we have harsh measures to suppress external demand in the property market, because the demand mainly came from mainland buyers. We implemented the zero quota system for mainland expectant mothers to deliver babies in Hong Kong, and also we called a halt to the multiple entry visas for Shenzhen residents. This is to protect the interests of Hong Kong people in the face of limited resources in Hong Kong. And these do not come from orders from Beijing. So it's not as what Ms. Claudia Mo said, that we only do biddings from of the Beijing government. This is for the interests of Hong Kong people. I hope that Ms. Claudia Mo can be pragmatic. Instead of only chanting slogans, she should consider our history. Mr. Gary Chen. Thank you, Mr. President. The Chief Executive just now mentioned that the tourism industry is very important. But unfortunately, a few days ago, because of a dispute over shopping matters, a tourist was beaten to death. And this caused an alarm to our tourism industry. Well, there are outstanding problems. There are long-standing problems. And the government has been proposing to set up a tourism authority, and yet things are still left in the pipeline. I want to know whether or when a proposal will be submitted to our council for the legislative work for this authority. Well, tourism industry is important. It contributes to our economy, and I want to emphasize that it has a very important social function. Apart from the tourism industry, other related industries create a lot of job opportunities for grassroots workers. Mr. Chen just now mentioned the incident. The Hong Kong police and also the mainland office in Hong Kong attach great importance to this incident. We must salvage our image as a hospital city. In the tourism industry, there have been quite a lot of problems, not only affecting reputations of individual companies, but also our reputation as a whole. It also affects our reputation globally. So we attach great importance to this incident. So I'm going to answer your question on the tourism authority. But first of all, I want to emphasize that we must all do our work. And as you know, in Northwest New Territories, there have been ongoing protests. And again, we should be concerned about this. And before we set up this regulatory body, as far as the industry is concerned, there should be self-discipline. Well, after an incident occurred, yes, there should be a regulatory body enforcing the law, but damage has been done to Hong Kong's reputation. So I think the industry should also regulate its members and exercise self-discipline. There should not be forced shopping on tourists. There have been incidents in which the unit of commodities have been switched from catty to tails. And the TIC and the licensing office are currently responsible for regulatory matters. They oversee tours, tour guides, and travel agencies. We're stepping up our work in this regard. The regulatory body will not replace, or the proposed legislation will replace the existing legislation to regulate travel agencies. So more time will be needed. And we will press ahead our work together with the Department of Justice. And once we're ready, we will table the legislative proposal in the Council.
Mr. Gary Chen, legislating would be complicated and time-consuming. Will the government consider taking a leaf out of the book of other cities which emphasize tourism, where they have measures to regulate the tourism sector? Will you take reference from these other places? Chief Executive. Well, in this period, we will focus our attention on the legislative work of the Tourism Authority. Once this is ready, we will introduce this to the floor of the Council. Mr. Kwok-hung, Mr. Chief Executive, you're in trouble and you're so muddle-minded. But please, when you speak, you're not supposed to offend the Chief Executive. I think what I said is a fair comment. He's really bad. This is what I said. Your question, please. President, he's unfair to me. I wasn't invited to his gathering, and I'm here to put question to him. Have you ever seen a chief executive who is so discourteous? Mr. Leung, Mr. Chief Executive, or 689 chief executive. Some reporters asked me how I'm going to be treating you. I said I'll be fair to Mr. Leung. This is not a war zone. You don't have to call the police. I'm being fair today for sure. I'm asking all these follow-up questions. I'm not asking the my own question. You said you're going to do something. You haven't done what you said you were going to do. Let me give you a multiple choice question. You take the easiest one. The BVI company, I asked you about that. You failed to answer my question. What business does it do? UGL, some members asked you questions about UGL, the declaration. You failed to answer it. You should have answered the question about UGL a year ago. You came here and talked about the color revolution, the foreign forces being involved. You have the evidence. You haven't come up with the answer. Universal pension scheme for 3 years. It is on the back burner. Standard working hours, I asked this on behalf of Ms. Chen Yunhan. It's been on the back burner for 3 years. You take your pick the easiest question. I can't really exhaust my question. I've been a member for so many years. I put 5 questions, and if I answered the question either here or outside, he said he answered the question in writing. Why didn't he choose to put a placard of C.Y. Leung, a cut-out cardboard of C.Y. Leung, instead of coming here physically? Your question, please. UGL, the BVI company, foreign forces, colored revolution. You said you would come up with evidence. Universal pension scheme for 3 years, no timetable. Standard working hours. Don't have to repeat your question. You have already put your question. Please be seated. You take your pick, Mr. Chief Executive. Sit down, Mr. Leung. You have to stop. Mr. Chief Executive, Mr. Albert Chan, please put down your placard. Please put down your placard. President, he asked so many questions. I lost count of whether there are 5. In fact, my colleagues have been answering these questions here in this council. Well, he failed to answer the questions. If an official is being impolite here, he should be chucked out. We get chucked out, and he's earning $300,000 per month. He failed to answer this question. Andrew Fung is on more than $100,000. 1 out of 5. You take your pick. Right, Mr. Leung, please sit down. Well, this is not good. I have to send him a clock. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, you have to leave the chamber straight away. Leave the chamber. Albert Chan, Mr. Raymond Chan, you have to leave the chamber. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, Mr. Albert Chan, Mr. Raymond Chan, you have to leave the chamber straight away.
Yuk-man.
Mr. Wong Yuk-man. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, please do not scream in your seat. We continue with our question and answer session. Mr. Kam-lam. Mr. Chief Executive, over the past couple of months, it seems that there were more cases of medical blunders in public hospitals. Some have to do with procedural issues, some have to do with human errors. A lot of comments suggest that the public hospitals are always understaffed. The public doctors salaries are not sufficiently attractive. Just yesterday, we saw that the doctors' pay wasn't adjusted in accordance with, in line with the civil servants, and doctors were resentful, and they staged a protest en masse that undermined the morale of the doctors and medical staff in the public hospitals. It is difficult to attract the right talents over the past few years. In terms of the importation of foreign medical personnel, we had diverse views. The speed with which the applications are granted fails to address the issues that we're suffering from. Will the government be discussing with the Medical Council to reach a consensus regarding the supply and demand of medical personnel in Hong Kong? And will there be any intention to increase the medical staff in order to alleviate the burden of the doctors in Hong Kong? And will you be bringing doctors into Hong Kong and improving the training for the medical doctors? Chief Executive, this is an important area for Hong Kong as the population is aging. The demand for medical services will be ever greater. In a lot of the public hospitals, we are witnessing an understaffing problem. So when I visited the public hospitals to visit my friends, I saw what happened. In fact, the burden is pretty heavy. We do have a committee which is headed up by Dr. Kwok-hung to look at the professional development and the medical personnel this steering committee will look at the possibility of increasing the training opportunities, like Mr. Chen said, and also the bringing in of foreign doctors and improving the pay and condition to retain staff. We hope that through this multi-pronged approach, we will be able to address the problems that we are facing today. As the population is aging, there is a greater demand for healthcare service. Mr. Kam-lam, President, some suggested the Medical Council should bring in more doctors from outside of Hong Kong. And also, they make a lot of suggestions regarding the regulation of doctors. Will the chief executive consider reviewing the composition of the Medical Council? Chief executive. President, how can we take full advantage of doctors from outside of Hong Kong? This is something that the steering committee will be looking at. If we think that by bringing in doctors from outside Hong Kong, it will address the problem of staff shortage, we will consider it, and we'll also consider the composition of the Medical Council. Mr. Wang Yuk-man, President, 3 years ago, I condemned 689 here in this chamber for a lack of credibility, for lying, for the despicable character. 3 years on, what he did shows that what I said about him is fair and just. President, Hong Kong is so unfortunate. We have this traitor 689 in Hong Kong. I'm putting my question. Please do not intervene, President. Your brother was in trouble. 3 years on, he has been backpedaling. He's causing all these grievances and resentment in Hong Kong. But he's so shameless, and he's engaging in this struggle, and he is harassing your brother as well. The civil servants are demoralized. The society is seething with anger, and we have the legitimate right to condemn him. Why is it that whenever he goes to the mainland, he will be bad-mouthing Hong Kong? When he visited Shenzhen on the 30th of January, he said that he envied Shenzhen. If Hong Kong can be half as good as Shenzhen, it would be good. Why would he be putting down Hong Kong like this outside Hong Kong? Please put your question, Mr. Wang. Many members always said that the voters are asking us to put questions, and he said that one time a 5-year-old boy asked him, talked about a housing problem. Now, my question for him is that when are you going to die? This is my question for you. Please sit down, Mr. Wang. Chief Executive. Mr. President, over the past 3 years, Mr. Wang Kwok-hung, I think Mr. Wang offended the chief executive. Mr. President, you said that here in this Q&A session, one is not supposed to offend the chief executive. Will you pass a judgment as to whether that was offensive? Please, the two Mr. Wangs, sit down, please. I think the chief executive, Mr. Wang Yuk-man. Mr. Wang Yuk-man, I think the chief executive can address the questions. Mr. Chief Executive, President, I wish Mr. Wang is going to have a long life because grievances will not do him any good. Our efforts are playing for everybody. My policy address is formulated in accordance with the manifesto that I put together when I ran for office. For 12 months after the policy address is delivered, the whole governing team would be working very hard to achieve what we set out to do. I talked about in my opening speech the economic situation, the business environment in Hong Kong, the income situation for the members of the public. I'm sure that all these are plain figures for everybody by merely shouting, we will not be able to do anything. Well, I can speak more clearly than you. Why do you put down Hong Kong in the mainland? Please answer me. Now, people don't really like, you don't like people shouting, putting Hong Kong down in overseas countries. But why are you putting Hong Kong down in China? You are a traitor of Hong Kong. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, you have to leave the chamber. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, you have to leave. You have breached the rules of procedure repeatedly. Mr. Wong Yuk-man, leave the chamber. We adjourn the meeting.